Yes, I think we'll very clearly make the point to UNESCO that there is no need to single the Great Barrier Reef out in this way. The reason that the UNESCO in the past has singled out places at risk is because they wanted to see greater government investment or greater government action. And since the change of government, both of those things have happened. We believe that it's important to say that yes, climate change is a risk to ecosystems like the Great Barrier Reef, but that means it's a risk to every reef globally. If you look at the World Heritage listed sites in Australia, there are other World Heritage listed sites in Australia that we worry about in terms of climate change as well. That's the case globally. Fragile ecosystems around the world are at risk if we don't keep global warming below 1.5 degrees. And that's why this government is acting. That's why we have stepped up to be a good international citizen when it comes to climate change. I can't tell you what a difference it makes when we go to international fora to have a government that is prepared to act on climate change. Just recently at the conference in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, it was Australia that was part of the global effort to push back on those countries that wanted to water down that 1.5 degree warming target. Australia has played, in the last 6 months, Australia has played a constructive role globally. We have legislated domestically. We've legislated our carbon pollution reduction targets. We've got a target of 82% of our electricity coming from renewable sources. We're acting on an electric vehicle strategy. In every way, you see that the Australian government has higher ambition when it comes to tackling climate change. And I'd also say this, we have made huge changes to our environmental policies more generally. We're rewriting our environmental laws. I'll be releasing the response to the Samuel review shortly. And we're establishing an environmental protection agency. We've set a goal of 0 new extinctions. We've committed to protecting 30% of our land and 30% of our seas by 2030. We've signed the Leaders' Pledge for Nature at the United Nations, something that the previous government refused to do. Look, there's a long list. I'm not going to go through the whole list. But the point is, this report was written at a time before the government was taking the threats to the reef seriously. Everything has changed. As sources close to UNESCO have said in Le Monde today, it's like night and day.
Minister, the report says that land clearing is a particular concern and the impact on water quality. Your predecessor, Susan Lee, blocked a large-scale agricultural land clearing proposal on Cape York. Will you commit to action from the federal government to reduce land clearing in North Queensland, or will you be happy to see the same rate continue into the future?
Well, I think it is very important to look at land clearing issues when it comes to the Great Barrier Reef, and I'm not going to make a generalised statement. I'll take each proposal before me as it comes. But I would say this, runoff and sediment is one of the most important issues that we need to tackle. We've set aside funding to tackle gully and riverbank and estuarine restoration projects. And we do see this as a really important part of dealing with the threats to the reef. I'm working very closely with Megan Scanlon, the Queensland Environment Minister, on issues around what we can do as partner governments, the Queensland and Commonwealth governments together.
Minister, when this issue emerged last time under the previous government suggested that China had been involved in sort of the UNESCO process, gumming up the works behind the scenes. Is there any suggestion of that happening this time, or is this being strictly treated on environmental merits?
Oh, look, I'm not going to get into the previous government's conspiracy theories about this. I think it's actually undeniable that climate change is a risk to every reef globally, and we need to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees if we're going to protect not just the Great Barrier Reef but all reefs. We are so very fortunate in Australia that we've got the most amazing scientists working on risks to the reef. We've got scientists that are working on, triggering coral spawning so that we can replant coral more successfully. We've got scientists working on how to tackle invasive species like the crown of thorns starfish, reduce bycatch. Look, they're doing amazing work, and that work is being shared globally. We have relationships with other nations that have coral reefs that are also at risk. We're sharing our science with them because we see this as a global threat. What I say is there is no need to single out the Great Barrier Reef in Australia because there is no government taking the risks to coral reefs more seriously than the Australian government, and we're working hand in hand with the Queensland government to protect, restore and manage the Great Barrier Reef so that future generations will have the same opportunity to see this magnificent site as we've had.
Minister, coal and gas projects, early on in your tenure you rejected a coal project in Queensland. Will that have to become the norm now? Will the government be able to say it's going to be a different part rule out for a new coal and gas project?
Yes, I think the project you're referring to is the Clive Palmer coal mine, which I said I was inclined to reject. The status of that at the moment is that the company has come back with a whole range of additional information that I'm considering. So while I have indicated that I'm inclined to prevent that going ahead, I'm still going through the process of considering that additional information. But, that's a coal mine, an open cut mine proposed for 9.7 kilometres away from the Great Barrier Reef with, water sources going from beside the mine into precious and environmentally delicate seagrass meadows that dugongs and turtles and fish use to breed and feed. So there are projects like that that will have to have close scrutiny, there's no question of that.
Yes. If the reef is listed by the UN, what would be a suitable time frame for the government to take it back off it? And if it is listed, would that be considered a failure on the part of the government to lobby UNESCO not to have it on there?
Well, I think if the reef is listed because climate change is a danger to coral reefs, then until we fix climate change, coral reefs will be in danger. I mean, I think it is very important that the Australian government makes very clear that the Great Barrier Reef should not be singled out as in danger compared with any other coral reef globally. And we're going to keep saying that in all of our interactions. We've had some very positive interactions since coming to government with UNESCO. I've met with senior figures at UNESCO and said we understand their concerns. We are concerned about the impact of climate change on our natural environment, and that's why one of the very first things we did on coming to government is legislate carbon pollution reduction targets. And not just that, we're not just talking about carbon pollution reduction targets. In my own portfolio, we've got legislation before the Parliament to reduce ozone depleting gases. We've signed the Global Methane Pledge. We know that methane is a particularly dangerous gas when it comes to global warming. We're prepared to act on all fronts. This government is, as UNESCO themselves say, night and day compared with the previous government. And that's why we say that this listing is not necessary. We are more committed than anyone to invest in and take action on protecting our reef.
Minister, when the World Heritage Council made the decision last time to defer the endangered listing, one of the member states, Spain, raised issue of concern with the volume of lobbying they received from green groups to have it listed as in danger. Is this a concern, or is this an issue that you think we'll face again this time round? And what steps do you intend to take with your own lobbying to counteract?
Look, I'm not surprised that under the previous government, environmental groups thought the only chance they had of protecting the reef was to get international attention to the fact that the Morrison government refused to take action on climate change. The situation's changed, and as you know, some of our own environmental groups have been saying this morning, the actions that this government has taken in 6 months are more than the previous government took in 9 years to protect the Great Barrier Reef. You know, there's a very new approach under the Albanese government compared with the Morrison government. That is undeniable. And so my hope is that we can work cooperatively with our scientific community, with conservationists, with environmental groups, and most particularly, as Senator Green says, with those reef communities that are absolutely passionately committed to protecting the place they love.
There are groups.
Sorry, I'm going to have to go to caucus in a minute, so we'll make this the last one. Yep. Well, we've already legislated a 43% emissions reduction target by 2030 with a credible path to net zero by 2050. As my colleague, the Climate Change Minister Chris Bowen, has made clear, that's a floor, not a ceiling. If Australia can do better, that's wonderful. But we have legislated ambitious carbon pollution reduction targets right now. We've signed the methane pledge, we're acting on ozone depleting gases, we're heading for 82% renewables in our electricity grid, we're making it easier to buy and use electric vehicles, we're looking at other areas of transport, we're working hand in hand with the Australian business community, with Australians more generally, to do our share as part of the global community to deal with the risks of climate change. Thanks very much, everyone.
Steve.